It was a crisp fall morning out in front of Bailey Junior High School. I had just made the transition from elementary to middle school. New school, new schedule, new classmates, one giant and terrifying adjustment. Now, it was still early in the school year, so like most seventh graders, I was just trying to figure out where I fit in. And my goal was pretty simple, just fly beneath the radar and not say or do anything that would draw any unwanted attention to myself. Middle school, what magical years, right? Now, it was my first year to ever play football. And so on this particular morning, I was standing in a circle of like 20 or so other football players. Some of the more dominant, popular boys were controlling the conversation, and I was just trying to blend in with the group. I was standing next to this kid named Gabe. Truth be told, he wasn't the nicest guy. And I still remember him turning around and out of the blue looking at me and saying, "You don't belong here." The words, they caught me off guard, but they sunk in pretty quick. I was not good enough to be hanging out with this crowd. The message was received. In fact, those words would end up defining how I saw myself throughout pretty much all of junior high and high school. It's been over 30 years since that moment. Now, fortunately, I have grown quite a bit since then. I've gained some much needed confidence, but if I'm honest with you, there are still moments where the words, "You don't belong here," they ring in my ears, causing me to question my value, question my self-worth. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. What a lie. Broken bones heal, but the wounds left by words, they can last a lifetime. And I think this is one of the crazy things about life, right? It's often the smallest things that pack the greatest punch. And this is certainly true of our words. Is there any part of the body that is more powerful than the tongue? With just a few words, our tongues, they can teach lifelong lessons. They can inspire individuals to unthinkable heights. They can provide life-giving water to a dying, thirsting soul. But this same little piece of flesh can also wage a war. It can ruin a reputation, destroy a relationship, shatter a heart, completely obliterate a person's self-esteem. The words out of our mouths have the potential to completely alter the course of a person's day, even their entire life. Just take a moment and let that sink in. And I don't know about you, but I usually don't live with that reality in the forefront of my mind. It's just so easy to forget and get caught up in the daily grind of life to think about that. But today, James, he's going to bring us a message that if we listen, we will forever change the way that we see this little muscle in our mouths. Because you see, though the tongue may be small, we're about to discover it possesses the power to control us all. I want you to listen to what James says about it. He says, we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a mature man or a complete man who is able to control his entire body. Did you catch that? James, he began his letter, we talked about several weeks ago, declaring that we as Christ followers should be pursuing completeness so that we don't lack anything. And right here, James says, this is how you know you've arrived. Here's how you know you're complete. You can master your mouth. Seriously? It's not in our thought life or how much of the Bible we know. It's not even in the good works that we do. He says the greatest indicator of spiritual maturity is our ability to control our tongues. And I mean, for this reason alone, we ought to pay close attention to the things that come out of our mouths. But in addition to this, James also gives us 4 vital warnings about the tongue. And these warnings, they ought to motivate us to always be vigilant about what our tongues are up to. Now, the first warning that James gives us is this. He says, don't overlook your tongue. Don't overlook your tongue, because it's surprisingly powerful. I mean, there's no debate in James's mind that the tongue is the boss of the body. When it speaks, everything else listens. I mean, our words carry amazing sway over the direction of our feelings and our actions, therefore really our entire lives. I mean, listen to the things that James compares our tongues to. He says in verse 3, now, when we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we also guide the whole animal. I mean, how crazy is it that a massive 2-ton animal, like a horse, that's uncontrollable by even the strongest person, can be directed by the tiniest child when you put a little piece of metal in its mouth? And James goes on, he says, consider like ships. Though very large and driven by fierce winds, they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So too, the tongue is a small part of the body that boasts great things, that the tongue, it boasts great power. Like a small rudder exercises an enormous amount of influence on the direction of a gigantic ship. The tongue holds complete command over the course of our lives. Our tongues can lead us to blessing, or they can lead us to catastrophe. As it says in Proverbs 18, life and death are in the power of the tongue. And so this leads us right into the second warning that James gives us. He says, don't underestimate your tongue. I mean, don't underestimate your tongue, because it's incredibly dangerous. Like fire, the tongue, it can be used to produce so much good, but if treated carelessly, it can cause so much devastation. Just listen to how James puts it. He says, consider how large a forest a small fire ignites. And the tongue is a fire. You see, being reckless with our words, it's like playing with fire. It only takes just a small spark to set a life ablaze. And James continues, and he's about to describe the tongue in a very interesting way. This is what he says. He says, the tongue is a world of unrighteousness. It's placed among the parts of our bodies, and it pollutes the whole body. It sets the whole course of a life on fire and is set on fire by hell. In other words, your tongue and mine, they are miniature versions of this rebellious and broken and evil world that we live in. And all the wickedness that we find out there, it can be found right here on this little piece of flesh inside our mouths. And the reason our tongues are this way is because they are extensions of our impure, corrupt, double-minded hearts. This is why Jesus, he said things like, the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. He also said it's what comes out of the mouth that defiles a person. James tells us this little embodiment of wickedness, it's been placed among all the other parts of our body. And it has the potential to spread. And as it spreads, it contaminates us and it completely overtakes us. The reckless, impure use of our tongues, it pollutes us, it sets our lives on fire, and then the flames, they spread as they're fueled until the flames, they consume the entire course of our lives. And as we're consumed, these flames, they violently spread to everything that we influence and everything that we touch, so that the world around us just becomes one big blazing inferno. I mean, are we not seeing this scenario play out in front of our eyes in the culture that we live in? I mean, is there any doubt that there's an uncontrollable firestorm burning in us and rapidly spreading throughout our world. I mean, just look at social media. When social media was first introduced, our already powerful words where they were suddenly given flight benefits. They could travel all over the world, anywhere they wanted to. And how's that worked out? You know, instead of bringing people together, it seems to be driving them apart. Division and anger are at an all-time high. We have unlimited connections with people all over the world, and yet feelings of loneliness and isolation are continually on the rise. Rates of anxiety and depression and bullying and self-harm are skyrocketing. Kids are ending their lives because of the words spoken on a screen. Now, please, I don't want you to misunderstand. I don't believe Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or Snapchat are the root cause of this issue. The source of the inferno, it's you and it's me, and it's our fiery tongues. You see, what you and I have inside our mouths, it's shockingly powerful, it's dangerously deadly, and it's completely unpredictable. This is James' third warning. He says, don't let your guard down around your tongue because it's utterly unstable. James, he calls it a restless evil, full of deadly poison. Because you see, one minute, it can appear harmless, even inviting. It could be singing praises to God. It could be worshiping and proclaiming the name of Jesus. And yet without a moment's notice, this deadly, fire-breathing beast can just snap and unexpectedly attack and spit out venomous judgment and spew out hurtful words of anger and condemnation. And it's horrifying. It's horrifying to think that this is what lives in our mouths. And to be honest, prior to this, I never really thought about my tongue this way. But now I think that there's a reason why God put it inside of a cage of teeth and lips around it that can lock. I mean, it seems that something like this we should never let out, and yet you and I can't help but continually open up the cage. Seeing how this plays out in our world, it's really not hard to agree with James when he makes the statement, things, they should not be this way. So how do we change this? And I think this is where we come to James's final and most important warning. You see, I think that if you're like me, you can hear this, and what I think is, I need to take care of this problem. I need to get this under control. And to this, James warns us. He says, don't be deceived. No person can tame this beast. We as humans, we've been able to tame some of the most imposing creatures on the planet, but no one can tame the tongue. And trying will only lead to failure and disappointment. But if this is the case, then what's the whole point of James even talking about this? And I think if there's anything that we've learned from James today, it's that if the tongue is the rudder of our ship, then you and I, we don't belong anywhere near it. We are incapable of taming this powerful little appendage that lives inside our mouths. But there is one who can. See, if we're willing to let go and let him steer, there's hope. And if you remember a few sessions back, we talked about meekness. And we said that meekness, it's not weakness. Meekness is power under control. It's our lives completely under the control of Jesus' guidance. And the greatest indicator of meekness in a person's life is seen in their tongue. You see, as the Spirit of God purifies our hearts, something unbelievably amazing happens. Our tongues start becoming tame. What comes out of our mouths begins to be life-giving instead of fire-breathing. Instead of wreaking havoc and causing destruction, put under the control of Jesus, our tongues can be harnessed to bring life to others. They can be used by God to transform lifeless spaces into life-giving places. And this is what Jesus desires to do in you and in me. And as we experience this transformation of our tongues, that's when we'll really know that we are moving closer to maturity and completion, and that our hearts are becoming more and more like His.